Warning, this video contains spoilers for The Last of Us Part 2. If you complain about it being spoiled in the comments, I will come to your house and beat you with a golf club.
Please stop. Please don't shoot. Joel, please get up. No!
Yes!
No!
Finally! Yeah! The Last of Us Part 2 is a phenomenal game, an absolute masterpiece. Game of the year not just for 2020, but for 2021 as well. I am in love with this game. But in order to talk about what makes The Last of Us Part 2 the masterpiece it is, we need to review what made The Last of Us Part 1 so special. The Last of Us Part 1 is a near masterpiece of a game for a lot of reasons. It's got an easy mode, top-notch exploration and level traversal, excellent gunplay, and a compelling story of a man's quest to rid himself of his toxic masculinity in a society that didn't take COVID-19 seriously enough. It's a game that's relevant then, and it especially is now. Joel is an alright character, Ellie is a strong, independent woman, and their quest to find a giraffe ends with a heart-wrenching sequence of events. I've played through it countless times and couldn't wait for Part 2 to come out. I was ecstatic and on the edge of my seat to see where they would take this story, these characters, and the prospect of family ties after the tragic events that occurred at the end of The Last of Us Part 1. But then, The Last of Us Part 2 showed me just how much of a masterpiece it was going to be in the first 2 hours alone. Time after time after time again, The Last of Us Part 2 subverts players' expectations through a gripping, emotionally deep, and layered story. At the end of Part 1, we're left wondering where the series could possibly be taken next. What would happen with Joel and Ellie? Would their relationship be torn asunder if Ellie ever found out the truth? How would Joel live with himself knowing the catastrophic results of his actions and adherence to violence? Are there other immune people out there? And then, boom. Suddenly, The Last of Us Part 2's captivating narrative takes players on a psychological ride of Shakespearean levels of storytelling. While Part 1 gave us a unique and morally gray story with likable characters, The Last of Us Part 2 delivers a fresh take on what would initially appear to be a typical revenge story trope by having us delve into the psychology of a wonderful cast of likable characters and 2 strong, independent women. Ellie's performance throughout the game shows a significant improvement over the first one. Part 1 was an Odyssean journey for Ellie and Joel to evolve emotionally and empathetically with each other, a dynamic that grew naturally over time to reach the pinnacle of human love and emotion, with Joel sacrificing the salvation of humanity for the daughter figure he had grown to love. In Part 2, Naughty Dog has managed to escalate this even further by making Ellie gay, which... Hang on a second. Hey, Breck!
What?
What does making a character gay do?
Nothing.
Fucking bigot. Rather than providing a narrative that focuses on the consequences of Joel's actions exclusively for the relationship between him and Ellie, Naughty Dog subverts expectations and cleverly tosses Joel aside, undoing the man he had become in the previous game by getting rid of him in an appropriately brutal fashion. Meanwhile, Ellie is transformed into a much stronger, more independent, homosexual, revenge-stricken woman that I absolutely adore. The natural progression of the character compared to Part 1 never comes across as forced or shoehorned in for the sake of the narrative. It's an evolution that drives home Naughty Dog's all too real and thematically dense message of the cycle of humanity's violence and the emotional consequences of revenge. While the first game's focus was on the development of a familial relationship and Joel's willingness to keep those ties that he and Ellie so earnestly developed, Part 2 sweeps all of that under the rug and subverts our expectations by transforming it into a classic revenge story that doesn't even end in revenge, with Ellie going on a gloriously brutal murdering spree to kill one girl that killed Joel, subverting our expectations once again when she doesn't even kill her. It's absolutely brilliant and enthralling to see Naughty Dog take the character to such profound psychological depths in her quest for revenge. Even in its sidecast, Naughty Dog makes clever use of wonderfully written and developed characters that are delightfully charming and spectacularly utilized for its narrative. The pacing is so well done that these characters, by the time the story had ended, really felt like human beings and could have their own spin-off games. Of course, It would be a sin to not talk about how the game spends literally half of its length on introducing one of the most masterfully written, empathy-driven characters in the last generation in the form of Abby. Once again, Naughty Dog subverts expectations by turning what initially comes across as an antagonistic, violent, brutal, selfish, revenge-driven murderer into a deep, complex, humane, strong, independent woman. It's difficult to decipher which of these two characters are more ingeniously handled with how long the writing and narrative plot points are, both women demonstrating their willingness to uphold all they hold dear. It's impossible to not like Abby for what she sacrifices and goes through for the sake of the ones she cares about, making the struggle between her, a character that was literally just put into this game and takes up half of it, and Ellie, a character whose entire development cycle from the previous game is progressed in a natural way, feel truly heart-wrenching and emotionally weighty. Even after a 25-hour campaign, with a jumping narrative and a bunch of flashback sequences, it still feels beautifully paced and written out. Its ending scene where a wounded, fatigued, and slashed up Abby puts up a decent fight against Ellie just goes to show how strong and likable of a character she is. And a twist ending that reminds us that revenge is not always the most appropriate of answers, even when your father figure is brutally beaten, murdered, and spat on for having saved your life, and you just killed dozens of people to try and get revenge for him. While the marvelous narrative of The Last of Us Part 2 is its focal point, as it was in the predecessor, there is no shortage of gameplay improvements in this brutally thrilling sequel. The Last of Us Part 2 truly makes you feel like you're one of The Last of Us by pitting players in a series of complex environmental puzzles, daunting obstacles and platforming, and exquisitely crafted third-person action stealth gameplay that features an easy accessible mode for anyone to enjoy. Progression through the game felt more nuanced, natural, and evenly paced, even as progress is reset in the middle of the story when we're forced to play as Abby. But whether it's Abby or Ellie we're playing as, there are plenty of critically decisive factors in every combat scenario that optimizes choice and immersion. The gameplay is squeamishly brutal, appropriate for its narrative tone, and is quite satisfying to progress with ease, whether you're slipping past its excellent stealth AI or struggling to survive amidst a horde of undead. The Last of Us Part 2 features some of the most stunning visuals ever to be held on the PlayStation 4, with The Last of Us Part 2 is indisputably the finest game of the PlayStation 4. The Last of Us Part 1 set an almost impossibly high bar to surpass for its narrative-rich experience, yet somehow, Naughty Dog has managed to pull through an emotionally gripping tale of the consequences of human revenge that expertly evolves its characters and uses new ones to their fullest effects, in a thrilling gameplay experience complete with delightfully crafted visuals and a brilliant score. 10 out of 10. Game of the Year. It has a little something for everyone.